if you've made the decision, you should be able to recount the decision itself. Then important is the list of stakeholders, and what I also tend to do is write down what role they had at the time the decision was made. So in this case, I was an area architect, and Simone was a lead backend developer. Later, Simone might be the CTO, but in this case, she was the backend developer. And this helps people get an idea of if the proper stakeholders were being consulted. And I repeat the word later or looking back because it's important that this is a tool for you later in time as well, in case you make a bad decision or need to revisit one. This is from the TOGAF standard, the Enterprise Architecture massive book. And this is a way to map stakeholders. So there are 4 quadrants. Stakeholders are either high or low in power. It doesn't mean that they're in the organization at a high or low position. People that need to implement a decision also have a lot of power, because if you take a decision that they don't agree with, they can just not do it. That's also power. So you have that access, and then you have the level of interest. Are people very involved, or is it very important to them, the change you are proposing? Does it involve a lot of work in the future? Then you have a lot of interest. If it's just tangentially interesting for them, then you just keep them informed, or you just send the decision after you're done. The rest you need to keep very involved, especially people with high power and high interest. And that's mostly your team, right? And the people that have the budget for your team, for example. All right, then context is important. So you need to sketch what the goal is you're trying to achieve. Just a sentence like a user story, right? And we want to achieve this because this and this reason. And also helpful is scoping stuff. So you can say, okay, we're going to change this part of our system or organization, not this part. That helps because people can then quickly shut the off if you're talking about something that's out of scope. Helpful. And for me, I tend to look at non-scope because it quickly gives me an idea of, okay, this is not what we're talking about, something else. For example, so this is something from my practice. I think this is written a week ago in my team. So we wanted to increase our testing, the amount of tests we did, because we wanted to increase the quality of the system. So we had a goal that we wanted to test without butane in production, because that's what we did, for reasons, good reasons. Then, as a context, we used some C4 level 2 diagrams, just a big picture of the things we were working on, and some, I think, some sequence diagrams and user stories. And then we scope it. So we are part of a bigger system. We are working on the thing that we are responsible for, not the rest. So it's very easy if you read this. Okay, this is what we are talking about, not something else. Then requirements. This is hard because it's easy to come up with a list of requirements. It's just writing down a huge list. But the more requirements you have in this way of working, the more work you're going to have. So try to stick to the things that are influencing the decision. So if something is going to be done either way, then don't write it down, or not write it down as a requirement, because that will give you a lot of work. I'll show you in a few minutes. And significant means, yeah, for example, something that's high risk or high value, or something that's been tried before but failed. Things. Helpful is a list of quality requirements, because they shouldn't be only functional. And you need to think of business requirements as well. Like I said, the cost of delay, for example, could be really important. If you don't do this fast, then you're too late.
I'm here.
Me too. Okay. So in these requirements, there's sometimes tension, right? So this is a real-world example of when I was an area architect. I like that, by the way, that people are still here, because I've given trainings and talks where people were asleep. That's mostly after lunch. Okay, so sometimes you have requirements that are at tension with each other, right? So this was an example of a huge company, a digital media company in the Netherlands, that had a strategy where they bought labels like newspapers and magazines that were not doing so well, onboarding them to make them more effective. I know this is a horrible business case, but that's how that works there, and it's needed. But they also need to be able to sell off the things that they bought earlier, because sometimes it just doesn't work. If someone is interested, it's a way to make money for them. So that has tension, because onboarding them in a huge network of systems is effective and it saves you a lot of money. But when you have to sell it off, you don't want to sell your whole environment. So that's a problem. tension with each other. And the way to deal with that tension is to give your requirements some weight. So you say it's either very important, so like just give it a 3 or 5, or it's not important, or it's not great, not terrible, right? And I don't know if this is appropriate, but I've seen the Chernobyl series, and I always laugh when I think of this guy, even though it's a horrible man. And then you need to define a spectrum of acceptability. So not just Moscow, you know, like a must, should have, could have, that kind of thing, but you need to define requirements, what the minimum acceptable state of requirement is, and the most acceptable, the ideal state. Why? I'll show you in a minute, but this is an example from the real my practice. So there we have least acceptable here says create something that does. Never mind. We are out of time. But anyways, we have a minimum acceptability, so things it's not great, but yeah, okay, this is enough to tick the box, and things, the implementations that are perfect. And they should be used in options. So now we have the context, you have the requirements, now you consider options. You do trade-off analysis, like you mentioned. So don't write down options that are all very similar. So if the requirement is get a fluffy pet, don't give me these two as an example, because they are too similar. Give me a, what do you call it, a hamster and a cat, for example. Those are distinct, and they have very distinct properties that I can compare to my requirements. Here you have the same kind of tension. So some options, they might be perfect for some requirements, and the other option might be perfect for some other requirements. How do you decide which is better? The way to do that is to also score them. So you say, okay, for this requirement, this option is a 5 out of 5. This option, for example, if I want to buy CMS, this is a proper CMS for the requirement I have. It could be better, so this is a 3. And this is the bare minimum, this is a 1. So if you do that, you have a weighted scoring, so you multiply those scores. And then you have very distinct options here. So option B is clearly the better option in this case. Option C is the worst. If you don't do that, if you don't use those weights and that spectrum of acceptability, you can barely see which is the better option. And it can also lead to wrong choices. So for example, if you don't do the weighting, so if you have a requirement and you have an option A and an option B, 3 requirements, and you say, okay, for option A, requirement 1, it satisfies it, fine. Requirement 2, perfect. Requirement 1, just about. For option B, the first 2 requirements we barely satisfied with this option, but the third requirement, it's perfect. And if you just count those numbers, then option A is the winner here, right? So it's 9 to 7. If you weigh your scores, so if you would have said, okay, this requirement has a weight, this is a really, really important requirement because the CTO has a bag of money that he wants to give us if we do this quickly, for example. Or this is security stuff, we're a bank, we need to be very secure with our data. This is a really important requirement. Then you can multiply the scores you did earlier, and then in this case, option B is the better one because the third requirement was really important, much more important than the other 2. And this satisfies that requirement perfectly. So this is a way to do trade-off analysis and objectively choosing something so that even the data from Star Trek, I couldn't find a picture that I could use, so I chose the actor from Wikipedia, agrees. So he reads your document and every time he agrees with the decision you've made. And this way of scoring helps make that objective, the decision objective. Okay, that was it. Still time for my self-discussion, so now I have posed questions you might have, and I already have the answer, like I said. So I see some of you thinking, doesn't this take forever? And the answer is, it doesn't have to, if you have the right people together. For example, I've written these kinds of documents with a team in 2 hours or in a day, and I've written ADRs that are like, that took a quarter, maybe more. So if you need to make a decision quick, then you need to keep the goal in mind. We need to make a decision. You need to not make no decision. That's important. If you have tools that you're already familiar with, which was part of the, I proposed this at a workshop, and we would have delved into the tools, but we don't have time. But if you have tools that are quick to use, or if you want to make an image, for example, or like systems overview, You can use Mermaid, for example, to quickly, with text just create it. You don't have to slide around images. And you need to practice, because the more you do this, the faster you get at doing this. Okay, second question you have. What if you take the wrong decision? That's okay, so I mentioned this earlier. This is good, because if you take the wrong decision and you have written down nothing, or you're like you did like one of the 5 wrong examples, then you have a problem, because you need to revisit the whole process. And if you've written down everything you were involving in the decision, then it's easy to see, so we missed this requirement, or we made this requirement not important, but it turns out that it was really important. And then your numbers change, and maybe option A is suddenly the better candidate of the 2. Or you have a system, it's working fine for 10 years, all of a sudden it seems like the database you're using is slowing you down. For example, you used a normalized data structure, and now you want to use documents because you want to move really fast. For example, that don't want to go into the discussion, but it could be that one of the requirements changed, one of the options, because there are more better options available now than 10 years ago. And you've written down how you thought about the decision. You can just add an option to see if it's the better option now. Okay, what if you're not an architect? Because we saw there were like 2 architects in the room, but a lot of you did architectural work. That's fine, because like I said, you need to have a good stakeholder field, and it's not up to only architects to make decisions. You can also do lightweight ADRs, I call them DDRs, or technical decision documents. And if you don't need to choose between multiple options, you just have the one, or you already know this is the one, you don't need a discussion, then please don't make these documents, because that just slows you down. And you need to consider with your team, right? Just ask them, do you think we need to write this down, or do you think we're fine? Okay, if you're fine, then don't write it down. Also heard a lot, you're too busy. That's not true, because this will save you time in the long run. If you practice this a lot, then you will save time by being just good at making good decisions. And if you're making a good decision, you don't have to revisit it so often later. So you need to practice, even though you think you don't have time. It's just practice, right? It's a few hours a week, maybe even less. Okay, what do you do when you're done? How do you make sure it actually gets done? That's a big problem. See, I said, ooh, you got me. Because I've seen a lot of decisions I've taken that didn't become implemented until much later or not, because of budget cycles, or shifting priorities, or just me taking too long to get the right people in the room because I wanted the CTO and the CEO in the room and they were busy, you know? So this is a hard problem. I don't have an answer. I do know in the TOGAF enterprise architecture model, there's something called implementation governance. You should ask an enterprise architect what that means. Yeah, you're not going to have a great time. People don't know this. This is really hard. It's just project management, basically. So at least get the stakeholder involved that can help you implement your decision. What if your decision gets used? So these are 2 ADRs I've written. One is 3 pages, one is like 15 more pages. But the big one was a big decision. This was the CMS for a very large Dutch newspaper that needed to be replaced. And if you would have taken the wrong decision, then we would have been, we had a problem. So if it takes a while, it takes a while. Make sure it's appropriate. If you have been doing fine without, could be, but the examples I give, I think, are convincing enough to, I hope, to help you try to practice this. Last one, I can't do a presentation in this year without LLMs. So LLMs can help you, but use them for what they're good at, right? Text wrangling. So if you want to make a summary, if you want to understand a huge ADR, you can use LLMs for that, but please don't have the LLM come up with the options. What Venkat says is, if you use it to bounce ideas around, that's fine, because it can help you think outside of the box, but don't rely on an LLM to make the whole decision that's done. All right, so conclusion, the problem, I'm not going to repeat because we're out of time. The 5-fold approach is also not, so make sure if you follow a structured approach, make sure that you follow it, and then you have probably a better decision than if you wouldn't have. That's the only thing I want you to take home. And practice, that's also really important. All right. Oh, exactly on time. Thank you for listening. Sorry, bye.